Welcome to the October meeting of the Lower Stafford Planning Commission. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from the September 27th meeting. Did everybody have a chance to take a look at the meeting minutes? Good. Any changes, Dave? Okay. Can we get a motion to pass the minutes? Dave? Second. Sarah? That was Brad. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? One abstention. All right, next order of business is to set the date for the November-December joint meeting, Planning Commission. We have kind of slim pickings for the date. One possibility was November 29th, but at least two of us can't make it on that date. The next week would be the board meeting on the 6th, so it's looking like 12/13. Which is a Wednesday night?
Yeah, make that fine. Yeah,
that work okay?
yeah.
Dave? Okay. We will set the joint meeting on December 13th then. Okay, plan reviews. First up is 196 Main Street zoning ordinance text amendment. And that is being proposed by Mr. Mast.
Good evening, everybody. Nate Seaman is here as well from Spring Hill Realty. And their entity, one of their entities, is the applicant for a conditional use on 196 Main Street, which the Planning Commission had seen before. And the first or second time we were here, we discussed some potential zoning text amendments that would do a couple of things. In my opinion, the RO district kind of inadvertently left out banks and financial institutions from the allowed Class 3 uses. 196 Main Street is proposing Class 3 uses. It does allow other uses, in fact, some more intense uses like restaurants with drive-throughs, offices, retail, etc., service industry, but did not include banks or financial institutions. So the first part of the amendment is to add that use to the Class 3 conditional uses that are allowed in the RO district. And Michelle has a review letter that I'll go through as well. And one of the things she mentions, and I agree with her, is that there's a lot of inconsistency throughout the township's zoning ordinance of how that particular use is titled or described. It's not consistent. Some say banks, some say financial institutions, some use both. Village Commercial, I think, has it as a subset of office, so it's an opportunity perhaps to clean some of that up as well. The second part of these zoning text amendment is also, in my opinion, in the RO district to clear up some incompatibilities in the language for driveways. Right now, for a property along Main Street, for example, you're required to, under most circumstances, to provide a driveway on Main Street with a shared access. There's another section of the ordinance that says you can have no more than one driveway access per street frontage. There's a third section of the ordinance which says if you have a corner lot on two hierarchies of street, you must only take access from the street of lower classification, which is in kind of direct opposition to the other section of the ordinance, which would require you to have a driveway on Main Street and share it. So the text language is attempting to correct that by allowing for Class 3 uses the principal access on the street of lesser classification, but also allow a second secondary access along Main Street. And our 196 Main Street conditional use plan proposes just that. And I think that goes to clean up some of the language in the RO district. I don't know if you have any questions so far, but I was going to go to Michelle's review and go through that. It's dated October 23rd. And quickly as I can go through these comments. The ordinance provisions for driveway accesses for corner lots only speaks to lots that front on streets of different classifications. Requirements should be considered for corner properties that front on streets of the same classification. Is more than one access allowed? Should the access be subject to some minimum length of street frontage? So in the first section, on the first part of that, should there be additional language that would consider lots that are on streets of the same classification, corner lots? I actually don't know whether that exists anywhere in the township, but it probably is possibly could be a lot that exists at some point in the future with a new road or something like that.
And Rick, if I may interrupt, this goes to the inconsistencies of that whole section of the ordinance. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention because I didn't know if you only wanted one access from a corner property or if you were gonna allow two. The current ordinance speaks to driveway access from roads of different classifications. So I wanted to make sure we cleaned it up and see what the township wanted and have a requirement for roads of the same classification.
So
we're gonna allow one or two.
Right. So the section of the ordinance that's immediately before the proposed change, I think covers that. It says no more than one driveway access shall be permitted per street frontage. But that could be clarified if there was language before that that referred to corner lots on streets of the same classification. So that I think would address Michelle's comment.
But then further on, I think it might be a subsection that you created. It says that there shall be no other access on, no other access allowed. And I guess we could clean it up however we need to, but I guess the planning commission should weigh in on, do they want an access on two road frontages? First of all, does it matter if they're, Sumney Town Pike and Quarry Road, two different roads of different classifications, or do you only want one access for a corner lot?
Kind of depends on the size of the lot, too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So back to what Michelle said, there's, in my mind, there's two classifications of possibilities. One is when a corner lot has access from streets of the same classification. And one where they have access, corner lot has access from streets of two different classifications. I think in the first case, it's permitted to have one driveway access per street frontage, and that's section 164-62-18 G1, and that had already existed. That language was already in the ordinance. What was added is to discuss corner lots which have street frontage on two different classifications. So for class 1 and class 2 uses, you can only take access from the street of lower classification, and the reason that is because class 1 and class 2 are much smaller lots and less intense uses. It's when you get to the class 3 standards, which is 5 acres or greater, it allows the more intense use like apartments, retail, potentially banks and financial institutions, etc. That's when you would be permitted to have the principal access from the street of lesser classification and a secondary access on the street of higher classification. I think even from an access standpoint, that would make sense for the larger tracts. So I think it's in the ordinance already. It just may need some clarification on that existing one. That would be for corner lots. That front on streets of the same classification. I think that would maybe address your.
So I guess going back to the question, do you want two accesses? One on one on each street?
And are we talking purely just RO at this point
This is just our,
Yes,
with the 5 acre minimum?
well, that's a class 3,
The class 3 RO.
right?
Are we talking about a class 3 RO or all RO?
so if the language was left as it is and as proposed, you would still only be able to have one driveway access for class 1 and class 2 uses. If they're on streets of
Right.
different classification, but you're on, if it's corner lot streets of the same classification, you could have one per street frontage. The ordinance already said that. But if you have a class 3 use on a corner lot, a little confusing, streets of different classifications, your principal access would have to be on the street of lesser or lower classification. The secondary access would be on street of higher classification. That situation actually exists on the property across the street from 196 Main Street. There's an existing limited access. There's a driveway that was already there, but when Maiden Point came through, it was converted right in and right out. And then it also has an access to the new quarry road that was constructed. So another example of the same situation there.
Seems to make sense.
Yeah.
So just to interject in the moment, not to jump around the review letters, but Claire makes a pretty good point.
She does. I was gonna get to that. Gonna ignore that.
About the uses.
Yes, well. I'll go through Michelle's and then
Okay,
I was gonna
sure.
get Claire's after that. Comment number 2 is just pointing out that we're talking about class 3 uses primarily, that section governs. Comment number 4 is what I had talked about. Section 164-62-18G should be further analyzed for inconsistencies. For example, 164-62-18G1 states no more than one driveway access shall be permitted per street frontage, which may be interpreted to allow one driveway on each street frontage. I think that's correct, actually. However, later subsections do not allow more than one driveway access, and it all goes to whether it's 2 different classifications or the same classification. I believe if it's the same classification, you would be permitted one driveway per street frontage. And if it's 2 streets of 2 different classifications with the amendment, be one driveway on the street of lesser classification for classes 1 and 2, and then the secondary access on the higher classification for class 3 uses. Hopefully I haven't thoroughly confused it. She's recommending a change to the sections of the ordinance that add parentheses in quotes or prevented by other site restrictions as determined by the township to the end of the sentence.
Just a catch all.
I mean, we don't have an issue with that if
Yeah,
I
that's
think it makes sense.
right now, and I didn't bring my ordinance with me, that says that you can have an additional access if there are some, I think it's site restricted.
Crossing wetlands or steep slopes or any other.
And I thought,
You're
put
recommending.
any other dimensional requirements in there that will prevent it.
I don't think that's an issue. Another text change Michelle's recommending in comment number 6, unless it's prohibited by 164-62-18G. That is talking about, I'm sorry, I have to find that section.
That is talking about the number of accesses for each street frontage. And it does. I was unsure by the wording or the interpretation of it, if you were only allowed one, like you're saying, for class 1 and class 2, there's only one street access allowed. But that section would allow more than one, so I wanted to put in there, an additional partial sentence that says, unless it's prohibited by that prior ordinance that says that you can only have one access.
Per street, you're talking about.
Right,
Yeah. Or one access. There's no such circumstance, I believe, where you can have more than one access per street. You could only have two access if you have a corner lot. That's the way the ordinance reads, just to be clear on. However, we don't have an issue with that added language. Number 7. G3B. Again, these are comments on the existing text of the
correct.
ordinance. 3B2.
That talks about, I believe, residential developments.
Now we're talking about ROs and now we're just going to residential now.
These sections of the ordinance talk about residential. I don't know why we're parsing out residential developments.
So basically, I mean, that's up to the township. That's
Right,
the way the ordinance reads today. It's
So
not
they'll
something
have to
that's being proposed. But, I mean, the applicant doesn't have an issue if township wants to clean up that language or with it. Another suggestion. Again, not having to do with the proposed amendment. When a shared driveway within an abutting lot is utilized, the existing driveway on the applicant's
site,
site
hearing.
shall be eliminated. Unless the Board of Supervisors agrees, it's in the best interest of the development to keep the driveway. Again, that's not part of our proposed amendment, but I'll
Right.
leave that up to the
Just
township.
suggestions if they want.
I would presume that the solicitor at some point would revise the text and take into consideration some of these recommendations as well. Next comment 9, we question if non-residential is required. GB 35 and H. Again, that's the existing text of the ordinance. I'll let that up to the township. And then comment number 10 is talking about other sections of the ordinance and the inconsistencies that's throughout the ordinance. And again, not really what the applicant's proposing, but I would agree that that language should be cleaned up throughout the ordinance. It should be consistent. And number 11 is again another section of the ordinance, just a parking ordinance change. So I think, Michelle, you took the opportunity to kind of look at beyond what we're proposing, and maybe some other sections of the ordinance need to be cleaned up at the same time. And, I think that probably makes sense, but it's really not something we would enter into, and we didn't see that there were any issues with any of that cleanup language. Yes, I agree with that.
And I was just gonna say, Mike, that last one had to do with the prior development that required so many handicap spaces. Because it was an existing office, so now it's a good opportunity to go in and just say it has to be for the ADA.
Right.
requirements.
That would cover if those requirements changed also. I did accidentally skip over something in comment number 1. Shell is setting, so should the access be subject to a minimum length of street frontage? And that's probably a good idea. If you have a corner lot and one of the street frontages was 50 feet, you would not want to put a driveway 50 feet from the intersection. So I would suggest 200 feet as a reasonable distance if you chose to include a minimum distance on the corner lot. That language would just be added.
Would that language be in Saldo?
No, I think, well, all of this is in the zone.
No,
So
I understand, I just think there's a provision for driveway access in relationship to intersections. And
there is, but I think there could be an issue where the zoning ordinance would allow it and the subdivision ordinance maybe wouldn't. And then some applicant's gonna come in and say that's a conflict and the zoning should prevail and it says I can do it. So I don't know. I don't think it's a bad idea to include a minimum street frontage to make it clear that if you're limited in street frontage, that doesn't guarantee that you can do a secondary access. Not likely, you need 5 acres too, so typically a 5-acre lot would already have that street frontage to begin with. On the county review. First comment is, should there be some sort of definition of what principal and secondary is? Do you have any suggestions as to how to clarify that? I understand the comment where the ordinance says, proposed language says this principal access has to be on the street of lesser classification and the secondary access can be on the higher classification. In our particular case, it's a full movement driveway on Quarry Road and it's limited in turning movement. Main Street, so that is one possible way to define that. I'm not sure how else it could be defined. If either one of you have a comment.
So I wouldn't want to do anything that was like, but in the case of code and in relation to development, I don't have any suggestions. I would want to think a little bit closely about. In this case, especially since there are code that would be affecting food development, how those two different accents would look, because is your street, is there going to be some kind of is it going to be timed or how does this proposed amendment fit in real life? How does it play out in the case of life?
I think the intent of the language would be that the access on the street of higher classification would be restricted in some ways as to its turning movements. I don't know how that can be written into the ordinance. But there could be language inserted that would, basically state that the access on the street of higher classification shall be restricted,
Restricted, mean like right into that.
yeah, or no left turn out or something like that, some level of restriction. In our case, we may be able to have right in, right out and left in because there is a turning in this location. I mean, obviously PennDOT will have ultimate say on that, but I don't envision that we would permit left turns out of that driveway though, because that's the most restrictive turning movement and the one you would want to prohibit from happening. That would force everyone who's going west on Sunnytown Pike to go out to Quarry Road and go to the traffic light. You could add a sentence at the end of that says the township may restrict turning movements on the secondary access, something like that. Then it leaves some ability for the township to regulate that.
restricting the secondary access. But aren't you talking the primary access from your situation on?
No,
The road, not access.
we're calling the access that goes out to Town Pike our secondary access, and that will be restricted. It will not have full turning movements. As compared to Quarry Road access will have every turning movement available, so. And that to me is maybe part of the way it would be. We discriminate between a primary access and a secondary access, but allowing the township to restrict turning movements on the secondary access may be one way to do that.
Yeah, makes sense. Were there any other, I didn't get a copy of the county letter. Were there any other?
One other comment. Township should recommend. Or we recommend it, county recommends that the township and applicant consider how different use regulations would be applied in the case of a mixed use lot with multiple uses of different classifications. Would the class 3 rule hold true? If there's a class 1 or class 2 lot on the same lot. My reading of the ordinance is that is the way it would be treated, because within the class 3 allowed uses, first of all, the class 3 property has to meet certain dimensional criteria to begin with, to even allow class 3 uses, but within the class 3 uses, it allows class 2 uses as well. So anything that's class 2 really becomes a class 3 use when it's part of the class 3 property. It's a complex ordinance.
We ran across a similar situation with the signs, governing the signs by use. And if you remember a while back when we were talking about it, I brought up, it's difficult from an enforceability standpoint and from a planning standpoint. If the uses change, if a certain use would require or allow the secondary access, and that use move out and a new use moves in, that they're not allowed that secondary access, then they're grandfathered, right? So they have the access. Do they need to remove it or not? So from a planning perspective, it seems more appropriate just to allow secondary access if you want a secondary access, regardless of the use. Because it's like a dynamic thing, it changes all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. So at this point, Mike, who's driving the bus on this? Is Rick or?
You know, I think at this point, it might be a good idea if we gave it to Jim's office and have Andy take a look at it and put it all together in ordinance format. And incorporate all of the reviews together. Because he would need to take a look at it anyway to
Right.
add the preamble and to button it up.
And he had some comments,
He
but they're
did.
very similar to Michelle's comments. Yeah, I think that probably makes sense, because I think what we need to see is a clean copy. It's still a little bit confusing, quite honestly. You okay with that, Rick?
I'm concerned with the timing of the whole project. So is there any issue with, you know, I'm sensing the temperature of the planning commission at this point, that you're not necessarily opposed to the ordinance change. It's a matter of cleaning up the language.
Right.
We have some commitments, lease commitments, things like that, that would require us to get moving with a land development plan too. Would there be an issue with processing a land development? May not happen, you know, in terms of the supervisors at the same evening or same night, but starting that process, you know, that would be somewhat at risk that the ordinance would be ultimately become part of the zoning ordinance, but stacking up the timeframes would eventually become an issue probably for us. In other words, we had to wait for the amendment, which sounds like it's gonna be a couple months down the road. Then started the land development process. That's probably gonna pose a timing issue for us.
Should be okay, right? Because that risk is on the applicant. There's no
Oh,
risk.
yeah. From our standpoint, it doesn't really matter. You can go ahead and there would have to be a note on the plan, obviously.
Yes.
Certain changes with, like, but I certainly, I'm not prepared to vote on this until
As long as we could continue in that regard, and yeah, then like the timing is necessarily an issue. We just wouldn't want to wait to start the land development process till this is done. I mean, I think that, a little bit of a biased opinion probably, but I think there's sensible ordinance changes too in this particular case. So
Hey, John.
Yeah.
I'm completely supportive. I just would want the applicant to understand. I don't think we would proceed with a vote to approve the land development conditional upon approval of the ordinance. Like, they should understand that vote will be contingent upon confirmation of the amendment changes.
Right, yeah, we wouldn't be able to vote on it at that time, but if they want to
Yeah.
go ahead and prepare engineering.
Yeah, I think getting started is efficient. That's fine.
that's exactly what my thoughts are.
Yep.
Obviously couldn't approve a plan that didn't conform to zoning. There'd be other issues that we need to start working through. We don't prefer not to wait until the ordinance, is in its final form to start reviewing those issues as well. So
I think that's probably reasonable, that we could probably do something like. Do you have any problems with any of the other changes that were discussed? With Michelle's suggestions?
no, really
Maybe
didn't.
Andy's?
No, I think it's, probably Andy needs to look at the ordinance too overall. And I mean, it's a confusing district.
So we should mention also the conditions. I don't know if it would necessarily be okay to move forward with conditional use either, right? Because
Correct.
the application we
Cannot.
have it now is conditional use, not the land development.
No, it has to be, it has to wait till the zoning's there. I agree.
And I would assume you would probably do in a perfect world, you would do the conditional use and the land development concurrently.
Yeah, they could happen concurrently, but both, I would like to start processing them so we can, at least get through.
We submitted the
review,
conditional
comments. We did. That's kind of just waiting, I think, for the zoning,
Right.
but the land development, I'd like to submit that and get moving with that at this point, start to resolve whatever issues. Now, I did meet, just to talk about that briefly, I did meet Stephanie at the property and we looked at site distance and access point. I do think we're at a consensus with the point of access, and that was one of the main remaining issues with the conditional use plan. That also gives me, some level of confidence with moving forward with the overall design, stormwater design and everything else. So,
The Quarry Road point of access you're talking.
yes,
Yeah.
that was one of the principal concerns that it was remaining. We submitted traffic study, preliminary traffic study data. And then Stephanie and I met at the property. So I think we're on the same page with regard to that at this point.
When would you anticipate that you would at least start getting the land development ready for review? Obviously, nothing's gonna happen until a vote, but.
Well, at the next plan,
Or
technically,
next month.
yeah, possibly. Well, whenever the
It's all
joint
going,
meeting
you're
is,
just sitting there on your desk, like.
Yeah, I mean. Be at the next planning commission.
Okay. How long, Mike, do you think this would take to have Andy have a? Probably more.
Before I forget my thought, the 2 weeks is the deadline. November 8th. Okay, so I'm sorry, John, what?
I'm just wondering, we do have a joint meeting, so we got a little bit of extra. Would you anticipate it would take Andy before he'd have something back to us, clean copy, formatted?
I don't want to assume, and I want to give him enough time. It's complex. We have 3 review letters. and some inconsistencies to clean up the rest of the ordinance as well, so it's substantial, it's not just a
So did
section.
you hopefully find it?
I think, yeah, I think that.
Does Andy have the same deadline as we do?
No, I just wanted, there's some moving parts. I want to see how close or far.
So the joint meeting is set for the 13th. The submission deadline is 5 weeks before, which would make it the 8th of November. If we give this to Ann, typically it's a month. I mean, you can get to a consultant to either do a review or file something, so I would say about a month. But then that would take it to like a couple of weeks before the December joint meeting.
Well, in this case, that would not get consultant reviews after that. We already had the consultant reviews, so this would be compiled, taking those comments into consideration.
Everyone would still look at, right? I understand what you're saying, it wouldn't be a month from the submission of the compiled package. But we would still need to make sure that it incorporates the comments from consultants, so.
Right.
It would be anticipated that it could be in front of the planning commission at the joint meeting. For discussion.
Well, I mean, let's try and we'll see what happens.
There's a lot there. So it's hands on deck. So.
Manis, do you have any other comments?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I'm good, John. Thanks.
Okay. Any comments, public comments? Okay, well, I guess Rick, you'll work on your plan and you work on the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Pressman Road, 3-lot subdivision.
No.
This is the Tuttle subdivision. Mark Tuttle, I thought was gonna be observing at least through Zoom, but I don't know that he's there. Harry Durstein is here on Mark's behalf as well. We had seen this, I think in August. And we've revised the plan according to the review letters, resubmitted it. I'm gonna quickly go through those letters. Michelle's letter dated October 17th. Skipping over what I would consider worldwide events. Michelle mentions the building coverage that there is a rectangle that wasn't labeled, and it may affect the building cover. That may be true. It may be a shed. I'm actually not sure what it is. I'll have to figure out what it is. But in any case, we're well below building coverage standards, so it's not a zoning issue. It's just a clarification as to what that rectangle is.
I don't think we have that letter.
Yeah.
Not in. SharePoint. Anyway. No.
What's the date of it?
October 17th.
Yeah, that was in,
Yeah, I got it. We got the McMahon letter.
no, that's
Hello
just because.
to all of you too.
No, you know what, I got it from email. It doesn't, sometimes it doesn't get put in SharePoint. So I always go through my email. moving across. Yeah, cause I'm sure.
So we will clarify that, but it's not a zoning issue. It's difference, if anything. Number 5, zoning comment is street light. Planning commission recommended lamp posts at each driveway. A note should be placed on sheet 1 stating they are required. I just wanted to reaffirm that that's what the planning commission would like to see here for the driveways. I kind of remembered that maybe there was some discussion about that item, and I wasn't sure there was consensus, so I'm looking for clarification. I don't know that we're opposed to it, if that's.
I know I wasn't.
I remember we talked about something.
I remember the streetlights, the
Streetlights.
required, and I thought the planning. A street.
Okay, so that, we'll comply with that. I just wanted clarification of that, that's. Subdivision and land development issues, I'm going to comment number 3, which are waiver requests. One of the things we're asking for is to defer replacement tree calculations till there's an actual building permit filed. The plan that we submitted, it's, well under the 25% that you're allowed of disturbance before you're having to get into tree replacement. I guess the clarification, Michelle, is, are we going to have to locate every single tree on the property? Can we do it through an aerial? Because I think it was in your previous review that you suggested that a sample area.
Sample area, right, so I want the planning commission to say whether they want all the trees at the time of building permit application counted and classified, or can they do a representative area on each lot during building permit application and determine how many trees there are?
So if you go to sheet 3, Mike, make that request a little more clear. Well, that sheet 2 shows the areas that are proposed to be removed. And if you go to sheet 3, it shows.
You share this on Zoom, but so we can see in the public. Second.
Those are representative areas that are to be removed by the plan that you show, but they could be revised for whoever buys that lot.
Correct, that's correct. So the shaded area, and if you go to the next sheet, Mike, it shows how our improvements are laid out. A flag lot has a greater setback, so that house is really where it needs to be for a flag lot. And I'm trying to avoid the need for what we're proposing here to locate every tree over 8 inches in diameter, in that whole portion of the property that we're not even touching. That's a lot of survey work to do that. Because it's fairly obvious to determine that we're less than 25% of disturbance. So that's the basis of the waiver, and however that language has to be that it satisfies Michelle, but primarily I'm just seeking to avoid having to survey locate all of those trees. Because it doesn't really appear to be a need in this particular case to do that. And Michelle did suggest that maybe a representative sample could be done, like 100 by 100 foot area on each lot, and do the determination. That would be fine with that. So,
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
You guys are-
And the sample includes species and quantity, so the sample is just species.
just quantity, most
Just
likely.
quantity.
I mean, it could include, yes, quantity, caliber, and species is what the ordinance requires. We don't always do species, to be honest. We do evergreen or deciduous.
Yeah, the only reason why you might wanna do the species is if you have
Ash
some
trees.
undesirable trees.
Right, correct. Any other comments on that particular waiver?
Manus, do you have any comments or any preference on that?
I mean, I think in the past, there have been times when we've identified an area of non-disturbance, and as long as that's mutually agreed upon, why survey in an area that we know isn't going to be encroached upon, but within the standard area, I think it's awful difficult to provide that waiver, just knowing they're going to be cutting in driveways and sand mounds and all that stuff. So if we can just agree what's not going to be in play, then I think it makes perfect sense not to have to survey those areas.
The next waiver we did discuss, and we're technically requesting a deferral of the installation of improvements, including sidewalks, curbing, storm sewers, and trail along Crestman Road. I believe the township's trail map doesn't include any trails on this property, and there's definitely consistency in the neighborhood of none of those improvements. What Michelle had asked in her previous letter is that we at least conceptually design the road widening and sidewalk to see whether it could be installed within the allowed ultimate right of way that's to be dedicated, or whether additional easement would be necessary. So we did conceptually design them, we showed them on the plan. And because of the grading and everything involved, it does require an additional temporary construction easement on the frontage lots to accommodate those improvements if they were ever installed in the future. So we've shown that on the record plan, it would become a part of the recorded document. So I think that, address that comment, but we're still requesting the waiver, the deferral.
We're also asking that you, state on the plan that a cross pipe is
Yeah,
required.
Exactly. We don't object to that. The next waiver is a depth to width ratio for flag lots, and I explained that these are extraordinarily deep just to really preserve as much woodland as possible. We could comply, but would push all the improvements deeper into the lot and just require more disturbance.
Doesn't make sense.
And the last waiver is we are not seeking to reduce the number of required street trees. We're just looking to use the existing street trees that remain. We're gonna have to, there's like 2 tiers of trees on this property. There's evergreens that are along the street frontage that interfere with sight distance for the entire property, which will be removed. In fact, some of them are already being removed. But there's a secondary tier of deciduous trees that exist. So we want to count them as street trees, but we'll comply with the total number of required street trees, which is 11. So that's a clarification of that waiver.
So you'll show those trees or count
We
them
will.
on that plan so each lot knows? Oh, you think that there are 11 trees
I think
existing?
that, no, I think we're gonna have to add like.
Okay, so each lot will know.
But we will comply with the number. I want to make
Okay.
that clear. We weren't seeking to reduce the number of street trees, just to use the ones that are there.
Not to be a pain, but those species that are there, they're not just junk wood
No.
trees, they're, okay.
No, Mark Tuttle actually planted them,
Okay.
and they're
They're not 11 ash trees sitting there.
they're not
Like that.
11 trees.
But I think to Scott's point, and this has come up many times in the past, Rick, I suspect you've probably heard this, where applicants have wanted to use existing trees to count towards the street trees, and exactly to Scott's point, they're either not in the right location, or they're crap, or they're not survivable. So I think, in this case, my recommendation would be, we support the waiver, but it's at the, we defer to the pleasure of the supervisors as to whether or not they find those acceptable for placement and species.
Agreed. There's a McMahon letter also dated, that was it for Michelle's letter, actually. There's a McMahon letter, which I would consider the entire letter will comply. We do need to add clear sight triangles, which are 75 feet in this case for all 3 driveways, the 2 proposed driveways and the existing driveway. The clear sight triangle for the existing driveway actually goes beyond where the driveway even is. And it does not impact the street tree issue. I don't see that causing an issue with the street trees. We'll work around them. But that's a way to comply. Everything else is will comply. I'll have to see whether the fire marshal will want some sort of fire truck turning template, or what size vehicle he would want to show that can access these driveways. But just for the record, they're wider than typical because of their length, and also at the entrance we have 10-foot radii on either side of the driveway, which makes them a little bit easier to access than a typical residential driveway. So,
But most likely we need the ladder truck to get back there.
so all on paving, or how would that typically look? Because that may be like depending on the size of that might be a really wide entrance for a residential driveway. Let me take a look at that.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's resolvable.
Yeah, she has all the dimensions of it and everything, so if you need that.
Okay. I mean, that's it. I don't know. If you have anything else you wanted to discuss? This one I would ask that you consider a recommendation, based on these 2 review letters. With a few of the clarifications.
Is there a separate waiver letter?
They're the originals.
Are they the same?
It should be.
The waiver letter? The 30.
August 30th? And they're all the same waivers that are discussed in your letter. The ones that are
I think the 2.5 to 1 ratio was added to that letter. It was not in the original.
It was commented on there.
So we did add that one, but that's was on Michelle's letter as well.
Anybody have any other issues or questions? No. Any public comments? No? People that are from.
Yes, we did. We discussed that one in September.
Yeah, I apologize, I was gonna hear that. Okay. All right, well, does somebody want to make a motion then? No.
No.
Instead of having the telephone pole lights out, I want to put a driveway post.
That's a letter we will comply with, or a comment that we will send Michelle's letter.
And just so we're clear, we're good with the tree count by sample. Well, I don't know if there's that many, really.
We have the dates of all the letters.
I do have the dates.
I'll make the motion,
Okay, it would be
but then it's subject to.
subject to performance of the PKF letter of 10/17/23
Yep.
and the man letter 17/23.
We need to put the county letter in there for prior. I don't think there was any,
Yeah, I
just those 2 new review letters
yeah.
are sufficient for the motion.
Yes, with the clarification of, the acceptance of sampling
Sample for
for the tree count.
Yep.
And also for waiver B, which is concerning the existing trees, that's subject to the review and acceptance by the board.
Yeah,
That it?
I got it all.
Did you second, Dave?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Right, we got a motion and a second. Discussion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, last one, Rick. 531 Main Street, boy, this is gonna.
It's about 15 years old.
It predates me and the planning commission. And I know it was later times before this.
Might have been the other building.
So this is an oldie but a goodie. It's got a history to it. Some of you were here for parts of it at least. It's the whole thing. predates Shell and Stephanie, actually by a number of years too. And not to dwell on the history too much, but it originally was submitted for about half of the property, and it was somewhat restrictive in terms of access to some of the existing buildings and configuration of the road. At some later date, additional property was acquired to the shape that you see now. And originally, it was a similar configuration that was submitted, but the two existing residential buildings were proposed to be converted to a non-residential use. And in as you're looking at the plan, the bottom right corner, there was actually an apartment building. I think it contained maybe 10 units in that area. And there was concerns about the density of the whole thing, and that required both the apartments and the commercial uses required additional parking. So little by little, we pared that density down. I'm not sure which came off the plan first, but the apartments were removed, and then the commercial use in the proposed or the existing residences was removed, and now they're just going to remain as single family homes, which is what they are today. And in addition to the two existing single family homes, there are 6 twin buildings, a total of 12 units, and a single private access drive, which accesses Sumneytown Pike, comes into the property and then connects with the lot that is on the H&G properties, property that's actually the John Garris Homes office location. And that is also a mixed use property. There's, I think, one apartment above their office, and then their offices, and then there's a storage garage at the bottom of the parking lot. And we had actually acquired a PennDOT permit for the access. And because the property was dormant for a while, that permit lapsed and expired. We refiled with PennDOT and did get some comments, but I did have a meeting with PennDOT, and I believe all of those comments are going to be resolved and not change the configuration of the driveway access. I mean, for example, they typically do not want any part of your proposed access, like our driveway radius does, to come across the frontage of a neighboring tract. That was one of PennDOT's comments, but in this case, we actually had an easement from that neighbor to allow that construction, and PennDOT acknowledges that and accepts it. So I don't believe with regard to PennDOT, the configuration of that would change. Michelle's letter dated October 19th, I'm gonna run through. The first comment is with regard to a tree that's located along the frontage of the property, and for some reason, no idea why it's in there. By zoning, you cannot allow a tree, you cannot remove a tree in the front yard, which probably shouldn't be in zoning, but it is. However, there's a definition for zoning, and it's defined as the area between a right-of-way and the building. This particular tree we're talking about is on the right-of-way, so I don't believe it's in the front yard. So I don't believe it is restricted by that particular ordinance. However, it also needs to be removed to put the sidewalk in along Main Street. So I don't know how we get around that. I meant to go out and see if that tree was still there, and I neglected to do that before the meeting. So possible the tree fell down by now because it wasn't in great shape back then, but I unfortunately didn't check it out. But my response to that comment is it should be removed to put in those improvements. You know, those improvements are desirable in this location. And I don't believe it's a zoning violation because it sits right on the right of way and therefore not in the front yard. So I don't know how we'll get past that, but that's my response to that particular comment. The next, I'm in the subdivision and land development ordinance. If you're familiar with that part of Sunnytown Pike. At some point in the past, Sunnytown Pike was widened and improved. There's pretty substantial super elevation of Sunnytown Pike there, meaning it all slopes from one side of the road. And it's a fairly steep slope right next to the highway. So we're continuing that slope until we can come out of it around our driveway. So it's basically taking the steep slope that currently exists along Sunnytown Pike and just wrapping it around our driveway so you get to the first group of units. So Michelle's comment basically is the street trees in that location are lower than the road. And your comment says 10 to 12 feet, but I did move them closer to the curb. So they're actually more like 5 feet below the road. And she's suggesting a tree terrace. And I actually don't even know what a tree terrace is, Michelle. So
Obviously, I got that from our
I figured.
Yeah. And she.
I would assume it's.
She is concerned about trees, and maybe John would have an opinion about this, the trees along that steep slope, because I think you right there, you're proposing a 1-to-1 slope.
Correct, which is.
And I don't know how those trees up by the detention basin up there, along the road there, yeah. That's at a 1-to-1 slope, and a terrace is just a built-up area so that they're not leaning.
Okay,
John, what do you
Yeah,
think?
that's probably a good idea.
Just to have the terrace, but you're
Yeah.
okay,
I think so.
okay.
yeah.
So
they're-
Rick,
they're-
Rick, I'm having all sorts of flashbacks now as I'm looking at this plan, because I remember this one. So besides the slope and how the trees get accommodated, I thought we went back and forth on the fact that the driveway taking access onto Town could only have a certain slope on it. I thought Stephanie was very concerned about how cars were going to have to rocket out of there to get onto Town because we couldn't get them to a flat enough surface. I also recall the length of that driveway. We never were able to solve for trash trucks, delivery trucks going in, accessing the site, and then backing out of the site. Where would they turn around? Where would extra parking? Have we had a fairly lengthy discussion about this parcel for a long time. Have we solved any of those big issues?
Hopefully tonight we will. So, in terms of access, yes, we do have turning template accesses provided on the plan. And in some ways, it improves the local access because we're connecting it to the adjoining property. So right now, that property only has a single access, and the access at that point actually isn't as good as what we're proposing in terms of overall site distance. So there will be an opportunity for the traffic from the neighboring site to exit through our proposed driveway. I'll call it a driveway just to distinguish that it's not a public street. And our radius is, the width of our road is actually larger than that existing driveway. So in that regard, I think there's some improvement to what exists today, and it is adequate for fire truck access, trash truck access, everything.
Well, one thing in regard to that, the turning radius, that's not correct. You use the smallest, one of our shortest trucks, a tanker truck. Or to use a ladder truck to get in there, which is about 8 to 10 feet longer than the one used in the diagram.
Well, we will verify that that still works, but in terms of the dimensional criteria of the driveway, the radii that are there and the width of the driveway, it's wider than what exists today. So I'm not anticipating any issues.
What sheet is your turning template?
It's toward the end.
It's on page 9, I think.
I thought it was later than that.
Yeah, 9 of 27. Because I think the other truck you used was a tractor trailer, but that bends in the middle.
Typically, if you can get a tractor trailer in there, you can get the fire truck in.
No, fire truck doesn't bend. Hook and ladder you could, but
So WB 50 is full-size tractor trailer. It's not an interstate, what I would call an interstate truck. It's a significant tractor trailer. Obviously, that wouldn't be the typical vehicle that would access. But I would expect even the ladder truck to be less restrictive than that vehicle. I'll verify those dimensions. And where do I get those dimensions?
Michelle has it.
Okay. So you can see, even with that vehicle, there's considerable amount of available room for access. So I don't anticipate that being an issue at all. I did, I would say, discuss somewhat at length with Stephanie, the configuration of the driveway. And I don't know that, I think we're closer in agreement than we started. I guess my opinion has been this is not a public street and therefore would not be designed to say a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. It would not meet the criteria for a 25-mile-an-hour road, and in my opinion, nor should it, because that's too fast to travel in this type of a development. And just to kind of, in my mind, test that theory, I drove through some of the neighboring developments like Smith's Corner in Burnfield, the development that's where the Lower Safford Elementary School was, and what feels comfortable in those developments is 10 miles per hour, and that's what feels safe. You're not going to travel 25 miles an hour. In fact, that feels downright irresponsible to travel at that speed inside those developments. And I would say this is identical in terms of that situation. That would be the reasonable speed to travel, and we would meet all the criteria. It is a challenging site, obviously, because of the super elevation of the, and this is probably what you're remembering, Manus, the super elevation of the Town Pike restricts how steeply we can go down into our site, because PennDOT only allows a certain amount of grade break between the existing road and proposed driveway. So the initial portion of our driveway is actually flatter than the ordinance would allow. And then once we get past that point, it goes up to a maximum of about 8% grade. And then that only is for 10 feet. And it's less than 8% on toward the road and less than 8% as you get more into our site. So overall, in my opinion, that's an acceptable design for this level of roadway. Okay. It's probably after that. Looks like Town Pike. Keep going. I think it might be after that. Those are just cross sections, and that requires cross sections every 50 feet. Okay, that's the proposed profile. So that initial slope right there, 2%. So 2%. Now keep in mind that plan is exaggerated by a factor of 10, so 10 times steeper than it actually is in real life. But the initial part of that is 2%. That's barely a perceivable slope. If you were standing looking at a 2% grade, you can barely perceive which way that's sloping. And then as you get further into the curve, there's that short section where it's at 8%. Keep going, like right there. That's the steepest section, and then it starts to smooth out again after that. And you know, we did work to try to come up with the best configuration. I mean, if Stephanie felt that we had to amend that vertical curve in some way, reasonable way, you know, we would be willing to work with her to try to come up with something that she felt was better. But I think, in my opinion, it's probably the best combination of slope and access points that you can come up with for the project. The other side is just a 2% grade as well, which is flat. If you go back to the the entrance. And I guess the other thing I want you to think about is that 8% grade, which is only for 10 feet of the road, is still would meet an accessible sidewalk. Slope standard, so. It is not. In my opinion, it's not a driveway that you're gonna drive on and think this is. Unreasonably steep. 8% is not unreasonably steep. Salford Lee, if you're familiar with that development, or I know Manus is, the backside of that probably is 10% grade. Same with Smith's Corner that I'd mentioned. They're also 10% grades inside that development, so they're actually steeper. So I don't want to put words in Stephanie's mouth either, but I think that knowing that this is a privately owned and maintained road had some impact on evaluation of those slopes. I want to say too, the other changes we made is some footprint changes to increase the amount of site distance that's available to that first driveway that's on the site. That driveway then.
Is there gonna be on-street parking?
I don't believe there is on-street parking. No, there will not be on-street parking.
And there will be the connection by the builder there, go out that way.
Next to Garrett.
It'll connect to that lot, yeah. So we do have an easement for that as well. I think there's a slight amendment to that easement to allow for some grading, but in terms of the access, I actually think it was a requirement of their plan too, to provide for that future connection.
And that brings me to a thought, future connections.
That's what,
That brings me to a thought about future connections. And John and Manus and everybody, that's the properties to the west on Sunnytown Pike. One owner owns probably about 5 or 6 of those. And I always think eventually they might get redeveloped. And they're just deep properties, a lot deeper than these, like 200-foot deep properties, 250-foot deep properties. And if they were ever to redevelop them, they probably would seek rear access instead of off of Sunnytown Pike. And with this being a private entrance, this could never be a shared access point to both of these. If they wanted to tee off the back of that, your access, right? Get to the back of their properties.
a shared access is possible on a private road, so with an easement, that is a possibility. In this particular case, the grades are dramatic, so I don't know if it's.
Yeah, they have pretty big drops to their properties, yeah.
Yeah, it's even a greater drop
That's
off
right.
to get to those than it is to our easement. So it's probably
I
not
think it's further back.
feasible.
Yeah, the same goes back towards Pioneer Circle more as you get 13.
Yeah. Just saying, redeveloping that next part might be tougher because there's not as much room because of stream.
Even though it's a deeper property together.
Yeah,
What's that? Yeah,
It's actually quite a bit. That side of the stream is quite a bit higher. So look, it's not floodplain, that's as much of an issue, but the stream does get closer to the.
and I didn't see clearly on these drawings either.
Yeah, that's supposed to go with that circle.
Yeah, that's what's gonna ask about Pioneer Circle, right? This property connects to Pioneer Circle, is there?
With the path. With the
Yeah, that's
trail.
what's gonna ask you, is trail going to connect to there?
There is, and I think that's an important connection. From the very beginning, that was kind of stressed that there's an important connection to be made. I think if there's a benefit
That's great.
to it happening, that's one of them.
I can walk to the hotel easier this way.
There is an existing, and that is township land. That borders, so it's all through the property. And then when you get to Pioneer Circle, that original subdivision plan from the 70s. Provided for pedestrian easement.
It's a big,
It's an easement, it's not fee simple land, but it's an easement between two existing properties. we would need some assistance with the township, I think, in approaching those owners, because even though the easement's there, they've encroached on it with some fencing and things like that. I know Mary West and I had gone out. And we talked to at least one of those property owners, but I mean, that goes back 15 years. I don't know if the same property owner is there, but. I think it would be, to try to get that connection all the way to Pioneer Circle. Require some assistance, at least going to meet with those owners to discuss it. If you go to the last, I think it's the last pages of the plan set, it shows that path.
Then we talk about, I remember,
Yeah,
talk about like a bridge. That would have to be a bridge.
there's an existing
Yeah.
culvert.
There's a culvert.
For the driveway, so the original farmhouse from Pioneer Circle used to come out to Sunningtown Pike. The driveway and concrete culvert is still there. It's a question whether that would be used as for the pedestrian crossing or some other culvert will be put in there, but
And there was discussion at some point of Barkey doing that.
it was. The original discussions, I mean, that's a considerable offsite path for 12 units. It's a considerable amount of expense. So the township, we had met with Mary West and with Archie. And the township was going to replace that culvert with an HDPE culvert, and then we would build the path over top of it. Not talked about this with Doug Jones at all. He's not been the first director for them for what, 10 years now or something like that.
So.
So Rick, I want to ask somebody, this really has, I think at least going in the right direction. It seems like there's a lot less intensity on this road. I do have one real concern though about this arrangement. And that is with the two existing homes. Would an applicant be willing to accept a deed restriction that they not be divided? Because I could see that with, especially the one large one coming back later on.
Making it to apartments or something like that.
Exactly.
I actually think we discussed that.
Well, I remember we talked about it when there was an office there and there was. It was kind of, we were really twisting to get the parking to work there, and that's what made me start to think about that.
On his behalf, I'm gonna say we would agree to that.
Okay.
I'll have to sell that to him later.
Well, I mean, because there is a lot of.
That's reasonable,
But I think that's a reasonable request.
It's a reasonable request.
Development now, see it come back in the
Yeah.
future.
And we've kind of been down that road, so to speak, before. And, there were concerns, so I think that's a reasonable request.
And
Well,
John, if we don't go that route, I think maybe no, would the applicant agree to no on-street parking? Because I just don't know that you've got enough room to really accommodate on-street parking.
They don't,
Yeah, you
they
don't.
wouldn't be able to because of all of the depressed curb along the street frontage.
Right, with all the driveway accesses.
What happens to the parking that exists now for that unit that we're talking about?
It all comes out, we're removing the driveway accesses and we're just providing parking off of the new road.
Yeah, it's right on the very bottom of the sheet.
Yes, there's one.
That driveway.
And Rick, just to confirm, it's a full interconnection with the adjacent parcel. So if the FedEx guy comes in, he can come in at the western side, loop through, drop the package and exit at the other end.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, that addresses a lot of the problems we were faced with prior.
The slopes and everything, are the new twins gonna sit higher than the existing singles?
No. The new ones are gonna be quite a bit lower, actually.
They're gonna be lower.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so, in some regards, it will help to hide them from Main Street behind the frontage units.
Right.
So all the units that are along Main Street obviously are not gonna have any direct access. Vehicle access to Main Street.
Right.
It would only be,
Rear
sidewalk access.
We said no on-street parking. Each of them have a 2-car driveway. Does that mean? The parties, there's no other parking, right?
There is
I'm
not.
not missing.
Going back to that single family house, are we sure that's not divided up
I thought
It is not.
as of now?
No, neither.
Front doors, doesn't it?
No, it's.
I'm
it
just
is,
looking at Google Earth, got 6 cars. What?
I think they were gonna approve your-
I don't know about that, but it is not divided. I've been it's a single residence, so. And we, like John said, that could be restricted.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. More items as we can.
Let me put this through this. The waivers, there's a considerable amount of waivers here, most of them are regards to slopes and things like that, but I do want to talk about one, just to kind of point out the situation, E 14239. Because of the grades and where the existing dwellings are with regard to Main Street, we're have certain sections of our sidewalk are actually lower than the curb. And there is an example of that again in the township on Smith's Corner. Has the same situation, actually has a lot of the same circumstances where there's a lot of grade that was had to be dealt with from Main Street, and those units kind of sit low and their walkouts, the access is from the rear, but there are portions of the sidewalk that are lower than the curb, and we're proposing that same condition just to get all the grades to work out. And that's more probably due to where those existing homes are in relation to the grade of the road. The other significant waivers we're asking for is replacement trees. We did the tree replacement calculations. We're proposing considerably less than what is required. We're asking for a waiver for the difference. But the trade-off was always that we would agree to build the off-site path, which has a lot of benefits to the community. And looking at the costs, and I could provide this information to the township, the cost of the path exceeds the cost of the trees we're asking relief from. So it's not as if it's a bonus for the developer or anything like that. But physically, I don't think we could fit the number of replacement trees that are required on the property. We did propose trees along the path as well to try to get as many as we could fit on the property and along the path. But don't feel that there's any opportunity to put more there. Anything else to really talk about Michelle's letter?
Is there a landscape plan?
What?
A landscape?
There
What
is.
was that?
And we will require an easement ultimately from the township to build the path and the improvements that are proposed on the township property. Yeah, so you can see the proposed plantings, everything that you see is that's shaded is a proposed tree.
One of the comments back here was about bollards. Where would they be going?
I think for the path, right?
On the path.
Okay.
To block vehicles from going. So we need to add a detail.
Yeah, we use that.
But that's what,
Yeah.
yeah.
Stephanie's letter, mentions the waivers that are related to the configuration of our roadway. So I've discussed that somewhat in terms of the slopes that we're proposing, the restrictions we have with right near Sunnytown Pike. Joe mentioned fire access, which we'll verify, but provided, we can get all those access issues resolved, and I think we can. I am stating to you that I think it's an acceptable design overall. The radius is, I think we're at 66 feet for a center line radius. There are other examples of that radius in the township. Again, there's examples of 90-degree turns as well in Smith's Corner and the development that where the Lower Stafford Elementary School is. There's actually 90-degree turns there that are much steeper than this. Obviously, they don't have the steepness of the grade, but even that is, at 8% is not, I don't think, extraordinarily steep in this case. So I think that's the main.
I just want to point out that we kind of summarized the geometry, but really we're looking at an effective 100-foot length of longitudinal slope that's greater than 4%. The ordinance required. So when you look at that profile, yes, there's vertical curves, but it says in essence it's 100 feet that exceeds the 4% requirement in itself. I would ask maybe Rick, if you can go back like to the profile and show where the horizontal curve is relative to that 100-foot area that is exceeds 4%. Just to give everybody a sense of the combination of the grade and the
Actually, it was after all the cross sections. So keep going. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I didn't. I thought you were at the landscape. Yeah, so go to the profile view of that. Go up a little bit. Oh. Go back to the plan view. Center curve is approximately 125.
can't jump out of the file.
You can see the station.
Hand up a little bit. The other one. A little more.
Put the stationing at the bottom.
Yeah, well, that, actually that inlet, if you go back up. So there's 124 right there, 163, so, the center of maybe the horizontal curve. Just to give you perspective of the edge, going around the curve and up the slope. And I guess Ricky did mention this is gonna be a private road, which could be posted at some. Like your post is less than
Yeah, actually, the plan indicates 15-mile-an-hour speed limits, technically. You know, again, it's other developments, I think it should be less. Uh, 10 may be more appropriate, actually. Again, that feels like what the speed should be. And if you want to do that, I would encourage you to drive through both of those developments. You'll kind of see what I'm talking about.
Do you have anything that shows how you get out around the builder's office? Will a truck be able to make it out around there and out to the road?
I don't know if that's gonna show up on my,
I mean, they got an approval, not that old. But can you look at that, Rick, for the, since you have to verify the other turning.
you know, obviously. That would be a problem that exists today, that rather than make it better.
You want me to show a street view, so I pulled up a street view. So.
Yeah.
Sure. So this is John Garris.
Right. It should be backing in around by that, I guess, garage back there.
Yeah.
To the
To the
left,
left,
yeah.
Yeah, I probably think they're done.
Well, then we could.
You can't go down.
Yeah, that's where the connection is. back
Google won't
there.
go.
Oh. How about an aerial?
Go to my plan in the first page, it might be on there. A little bit, I think.
Yeah, it comes right.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah, it does look like it's a decent mill.
And actually, that's where we're connecting, right at the end.
Yeah. You can take it wide coming out there.
Look at you, fancy pants.
I think it's
26. What is it?
26 feet.
Be able to make that no problem.
Feels good. I'm far committed to that.
You have a central mailbox too, for like unit 8.
Yeah, we have a central mailbox location. We actually, prior versions of the plan, I had a cross that. Street crossing, I ended up removing because it seems like mid-block crossings are not desirable. I only had one crossing point. So the mailboxes are between 8 and 9, or 7 and 8, I'm sorry, right there. And I removed, there was a pedestrian crossing at that location. Go down for the Garris development, there's one pedestrian crossing lines with it. So that's the only place where we have the crossing.
With that being in the mid drop. Not with sack, it doesn't matter if there's not a place for the car to pull off, they just stop along the road, mail truck stops along the road, unload.
That's what they're waiting to do. That is typically the way we do it with a smaller box like that.
That's the way it is, I mean, my development, 89 townhomes, but for they just pull right up, there's nowhere to pull up.
All right, so there's a few more things you're gonna look into and get back to us on.
I'm wondering, process used to be that you would go to the Board of Supervisors to discuss the waivers, even before the planning commission recommended. Doesn't seem like that's been happening so much lately, but it may be on this project, that may be a worthwhile exercise. In between coming back to the planning commission, that we go to the Board of Supervisors, just for the purpose of discussing the.
The board likes to know. what the Planning commission recommends before seeing the applicant's plan,
Recommend what?
everything. That's why they wait until the planning commission recommends approval, then you discuss the waiver. Or the.
Yeah, I think for this one. It may not be a bad idea to see the board first, because that could have, implications for the project. I guess I'll let that up to the planning commission. What you think our next step should be.
Well,
I think we're heading in the right direction.
I mean, if you want to talk to the board, if they'll discuss it, otherwise they may just say, we're not gonna put you on the agenda. For the,
That's. The
I don't-
board is most comfortable when they know how the planning commission feels, and there's no way for them to know how they feel unless the planning commission recommends something.
I guess,
And so that's why it's the sequence that it is. To discuss it. Now, if this project is just proposed now, instead of it being evolving through these years. We would send the applicant to the building and zoning committee.
Right.
To hash it out, and you have 2 board members, 2 of you guys, right, and so. So items like. Might be a concern to Rick and the applicant would be discussed at that meeting instead of. Straight to the full board of supervisors for comment. It's, yeah, I think it might be a little premature to go straight to the board for that.
I guess from a general sense of the planning commission, I mean, is there any strong remaining concerns with the project at this point, or kind of at least getting past what were the significant issues at this point? I will get the ladder truck. Prove that out.
yeah, I guess in terms of the overall direction, at least just my own opinion, I think that you are going in the right direction. I'm a little unsure with the waivers though, because I'd like to see the plan a little bit more worked out. On the way, in case some of them change,
Right.
Or if you need more. I don't know, what does everybody else think?
And the bike path is a definite, like that's not a maybe,
It's not a maybe.
okay?
Actually, if you could bring the information you were talking about, I think that would. You were talking about comparing the tree waiver to the trail cost.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think, I believe you, I think probably the case, but that would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think that would be a pretty large waiver if there was no other proposal. at this
Right,
point. So,
right.
and it's always been kind of stressed to us that was an important point in the past system, so. Okay.
Manus, do you have any further comments on this?
I mean, I congratulate the applicant. They've addressed a lot of the issues that plagued this project. But it's the first time we've seen this in years, and there's still a lot of comments in the review letters as well as a long list of waivers. So I definitely would like to see the plan again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, county plan review, Claire.
Steve. The solicitor is still reviewing the draft. And it was also that I want to do some. Specifically, property and value flow. And so what's so nice about this, and because of our schedule right now with our section at, we wouldn't really use that until for January. But as part of that process, we could do a sign for the, and that would be a good opportunity to also to attest the fact of the draft. The draft revisions of the district, and so we would be looking at how the numbers work out in dimensions or the site standards that are in the ordinance, how they would actually turn out on a particular site. And so that would be a little bit of a involved project, but it ultimately would be able to cover if there were any other changes that need to be made, and would be a nice visual to see how ordinance works out. So all that being said, I don't have anything to show you this month, but I hope to be able to work with Mike to figure out exactly what actually we want to see as part of that design work. And then reconvene when we have more time to sit down and figure out exactly what that scope is.
Okay. Sounds good. Zoning ordinance. Better. Any reviews, zoning ordinance amendments?
Yeah, same thing.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thought you were trying to sneak something out.
No. Yeah, we have a lot on the block, but
Right, okay. Comments? The public has gone. Abandoned us. All right, do you have any other comments, Manus?
I just don't know why anybody would watch Netflix if they could watch this. I mean, this is, compelling TV. So. Yeah, it's all good. Thanks. And sorry for doing this via Zoom.
Okay, can we get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That's it.